Europe has seen women conquer space, rights, and a voice like never before. But in the midst of this revolution, has something been lost along the way? What was a clear fight for equality has turned into a scenario full of contradictions. Has the rejection of traditional roles brought freedom, or just left a void that is difficult to fill? Has independence become synonymous with strength or loneliness disguised as choice? While the discourse of empowerment echoes everywhere, reality shows another side to this story. Hypersexualization, relationship crises, unsustainable pressure for success, and a growing sense of isolation. Could it be that what seemed like evolution was actually a step backwards? In today's Bello Mundo, we'll talk about this silent decay and what it really means to be a woman in modern Europe. Number 1. The beginning and now. For centuries, being a woman in Europe meant having a set destiny, marriage, motherhood, and the home as the only possible scenario. No voice, no choices, not much room for questioning. But then came the chaos, 2 world wars, and with the men on the battlefield, women came out of the shadows. They took over factories, offices, and hospitals. And when the war ended, many refused to go back to the invisibility and emptiness of their lives. They had proved their worth on the job market, shown that they were capable of performing functions that had previously been exclusive to men. It no longer made sense to give up this new identity in exchange for a secondary role in society. And that's when everything began to change. Women's suffrage was consolidated, access to universities grew, and over time, the job market absorbed more and more women. For the first time, freedom seemed like a real option. But along with these achievements came an unexpected movement: the total rejection of old values. Marriage, prison, motherhood, ties. Any trace of traditional life came to be seen as a step backwards. The result? Fewer and fewer women want children, and the birth rate in Europe has plummeted. On the face of it, female independence was a necessary milestone. But hasn't the pendulum swung too far? What used to be about having a choice has become almost an obligation. Career above all else, autonomy as an absolute priority. And then, when youth passes and professional success no longer fulfills everything, many realize that they have been left alone, without strong bonds, without a base from which to share their lives. The fact is that women have gained the freedom to decide their own paths. But are they all really happy with the paths they have taken? But that's not the only big change. Number 2. Hypersexualization. While the traditional family model was losing ground, another trend exploded: the hypersexualization of women. But this time, the discourse came packaged as empowerment. The idea? If a woman chooses to expose herself, then there is no exploitation. But the reality is not so simple. Social networks have turned the female body into a product: likes, status, and for some, money. But for most, it's just an exhausting cycle of validation. Anyone who doesn't join in seems to be falling behind. And ironically, it's women themselves who often reinforce this pressure on each other. The pressure doesn't just come from men, it comes from all sides. The problem is that what should be freedom has become a new form of imprisonment. The quest for digital attention comes at a high price. The woman who goes viral today needs to stay relevant tomorrow. This means producing more content, exposing herself more, constantly reinventing herself in order to keep attracting attention. And when the likes and followers don't come, there's frustration, insecurity, and comparisons with other women who are playing the same game and seem to be winning. And it doesn't stop there. When one woman sees another getting fame and money from showing off her body, it creates a domino effect. The subliminal message is, if she did it, I can too. But what no one talks about is that For everyone who actually profits from it, there are thousands who expose themselves without ever seeing a significant return, just the emotional and psychological costs. And this mentality paved the way for something even greater, turning that exposure into money. Over time, what was just an expression of freedom has become a highly profitable business model for some, and a cycle of attrition for many others. The fashion, entertainment, and social media industries feed this trend, encouraging women to see sensuality as a market asset. What began as a breaking of taboos quickly became a new rule. Standing out means exposing yourself. Exposing yourself means attracting attention. Drawing attention means gaining space, and perhaps money. And in the end, who profits most from this? Digital platforms, brands, and billion-dollar companies that exploit the need for validation and the illusion that this freedom is synonymous with success. The question remains, is this really power or just another way of manipulating women's desire for acceptance? Displaying one's body should be an individual choice, but in practice it has become an unspoken requirement for anyone who wants to be relevant in the digital age. Those who don't adapt to this dynamic often feel invisible, out of the game. The freedom to expose oneself exists, but to what extent is it really a free choice and not just a new kind of pressure disguised as empowerment? Number 3. OnlyFans. If the display of the body has become a bargaining chip on social networks, platforms like OnlyFans are the culmination of this process. Now, women and men can profit directly from adult content. The promise? Easy money, total control, and financial independence. And indeed, some success stories have gone viral. Young people who, in just a few months, earned more than they would have taken years to earn in a conventional job. Some have paid for houses, cars, trips, and a life that seemed unattainable otherwise. But this is the exception, not the rule. The reality for most is quite different. Many end up trapped in a cycle of ever-increasing exposure. In order to keep subscribers and guarantee income, they need to innovate, be more daring, and offer something new all the time. What starts with sexy photos can quickly turn into psychological pressure to go beyond one's limits. Blackmail, harassment, leaks, it's all part of the package. And that's not all. The competition within the platform itself is enormous. In order to stand out and maintain a loyal audience, the pressure to deliver more explicit content only grows. Many women report that they started out with a clear limit to what they would do, but over time they found themselves forced to go beyond it in order to continue making a profit. In addition, there is a psychological cost. The need to always be active, always posting, always pleasing subscribers can cause enormous mental strain. What seemed like a simple free job ends up becoming a digital prison, where validation and money depend on an audience that needs to be constantly entertained. The impact goes beyond the individual. This phenomenon reinforces the view that a woman's value is tied to her appearance and the desire she arouses. The idea that it is now she who profits doesn't change the fact that the female body remains a product for consumption. And what happens when the decision is made to leave this industry? Many of these women face difficulties when trying to change careers. The traditional job market doesn't look kindly on this kind of experience, and many end up being stigmatized when they try to follow new paths. Effective relationships can also be impacted when partners or family members discover this past. Another point that is rarely discussed is that, unlike other careers, published content doesn't disappear. Once on the internet, it can circulate forever, being used for blackmail, humiliation, and personal attacks. What began as a promise of freedom can, for some, end up becoming a dead end. And while some face these consequences outside the digital world, another phenomenon continues to grow: the cult of extreme independence. Number 4. The cult of individualism. Alongside hypersexualization, a culture of extreme individualism is growing in Europe. The idea that happiness lies in not needing anyone seems liberating, but the data shows another reality. More and more women are giving up relationships and motherhood. In European countries, the birth rate is plummeting. Governments warn of the economic impact. Fewer young people means fewer workers to support a rapidly aging population. But in everyday life, the reflection is different. A growing number of women report feeling alone, without deep bonds, and overwhelmed by too many responsibilities. The problem is not choosing independence, but the culture that sells the idea that any commitment is a burden. Time passes, priorities change, and many realize too late that they have built a life where loneliness has become routine. This doesn't mean that every woman needs to seek marriage and children, but there is a difference between having a choice and feeling obliged to avoid certain paths for fear of appearing old-fashioned or dependent. When the idea of independence becomes a dogma, it can end up becoming a new prison. And it's not just women who feel this impact. Men are also increasingly lost in this new scenario. Number 5. What about the men? Although the focus is on women, men are also facing the consequences of this new model. Today, many men no longer know what their role is in relationships. On the one hand, women demand sensitive men who share tasks and respect their independence. On the other, they still expect them to be providers and take the initiative. The result? An abyss of expectations. The more traditional men feel there is no more room for them. The more adaptable often find themselves overwhelmed trying to meet all the new emotional and financial demands. In the end, no one is satisfied. This creates a scenario in which both men and women end up frustrated. Relationships become unstable, marriages decline, and birth rates drop dramatically. The cost of living rises and forming a family becomes unfeasible for many. Society enters a cycle of individualism where no one really wins. What began as a legitimate struggle for rights has ended up generating a confusion of expectations and priorities. In the end, what is being sold as freedom may just be a new set of restraints, with a different name. Number 6. Where did this movement come from and why did it spread? Europe was the cradle of these changes. The Enlightenment planted the seed of individual freedom. Feminism gained momentum, and, in the post-war period, economic prosperity paved the way for broader social movements. What had previously been unthinkable for women began to become a reality. The vote, the job market, financial independence. Little by little, Western culture began to revolve around the idea of personal autonomy. But what began as a legitimate advance took on much greater proportions with the arrival of the internet and social networks. What happened in Europe was replicated globally in real time. The discourse of total independence found an echo in urban and globalized cultures, especially among the younger generations who saw this model as an alternative to standards considered outdated. For many young women in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, the image of the secure, independent, self-possessed European woman seemed like an ideal to follow. But the point is that not all countries had the same socio-economic structure to absorb this change without major impacts. In places where family relationships are still the foundation of society, this new vision generated cultural disconnects, confused expectations, and an even greater gap between generations. And that's where the big fashion, entertainment, and technology companies come in. They all profit from this new worldview, encouraging consumption, exposure, and individualism. The goal? To create an endless cycle where people seek satisfaction in instant pleasure, the need for validation, and the constant renewal of trends. The independent woman not only works but also spends more, seeks status, reinvents herself all the time, and this drives the economy. But this rapid expansion of women's ideals of freedom has also generated backlash. In several countries, conservative movements have begun to tighten laws based on religious values, trying to stem this wave before it changes the family structure for good. In other cases, more traditional groups criticize hypersexualization and radical feminism, claiming that it is leading society to a point of no return. The result? An endless cycle of cultural conflict. The more opposition, the more repercussions. The more controversy, the more this discourse grows. But at the end of the day, the main question remains. Does this freedom really empower, or has it merely exchanged one type of pressure for another? And this doubt leads us to an even deeper question. Number 7. A shot that backfired. There's no denying the progress made in recent decades. Today, women have more rights, more space, and more voice than ever before, and that is an unquestionable victory. But every great change comes with consequences, and some of them aren't as positive as they seemed at first. The idea that anything goes in the name of independence has created a new pressure to always appear happy, fulfilled, and self-sufficient. The modern woman can't show weakness, she can't have regrets, she can't admit that she misses something more. But what happens when reality doesn't live up to this expectation? What happens when, even with total freedom, many women feel trapped in a cycle of exposure, online validation, and loneliness? The promise that equality would automatically lead to happiness has not held up. What we have seen is an exponential increase in anxiety, depression, and emotional crises. Rates of antidepressant use have skyrocketed, the demand for therapy has grown, and the number of women reporting dissatisfaction with their own lives is increasing. The feeling of emptiness persists, even among those who have achieved everything that should theoretically make them full. And the social impact of this is also huge. Affective ties have become increasingly superficial, relationships shorter, marriages less frequent. In several European countries, birth rates are at their lowest level in history. This means that, in a few decades' time, there will be fewer young people to support an ever-growing elderly population. The economic effect could be devastating. Many women reach a point where they realize that career and social status are not enough. But finding out too late can be a problem. After all, building deep bonds doesn't happen overnight. The point here is not to return to the past or deny women's achievements. But it's impossible to ignore the fact that, for many, the idea of total independence hasn't brought the expected happiness. And that's where the final question comes in. When the quest for absolute autonomy turns freedom into isolation, has the path really been one of progress? This decadence is not an attack on feminism, but rather an invitation to reflect. Has this idea of freedom been properly understood, or have we just created a new kind of prison, but now an emotional and social one? After all, every choice has consequences, and what seems liberating doesn't always lead to satisfaction. So, what do you think about all this? Are we living through an inevitable transformation, or are we giving up something that really matters in the process? If you liked this content, leave a like, share it with your friends who love history, and don't forget to subscribe to Bello Mundo to stay up to date with everything about cultures, destinations, and curiosities from a world full of surprises. Thank you very much for following along, and see you on our next adventure.